Facebook, and we're with, in my mind, the author of the book of 2018, a proper launch of 2018, and that is coming to us from Cuenca, Ecuador, the site of many, many emigre libertarians writing and speaking from Cuenca. Mr. Greg Caton, am I pronouncing emigre libertarians writing in? I just have to get rid of that second sound here. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly, Greg Caton?
You've got it right. It's Greg Caton. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And his book is The Joys of Psychopathocracy: Why Criminality is Essential to Effective Modern Government, a Rebirth in the Wake of Their Destruction of Our World. And in my mind, this is it the Tom Paine of the New Earth? I would say, this is one of the founding people. We are no longer fathers and mothers. We are people. And I think, Greg, having read your book, which I recommend to everyone, we've got a link to it there on the webinar. We've got a link to it here in the article accompanying this video, which is on Exopolitics TV on YouTube, and it's on Omniverse TV. I really urge people to get this book because it's a game changer. It is a game changer in my mind. And I'm going to turn it over to you to really go through the profound metamorphosis that you brought to it and the metamorphosis that I went through reading your book, and that I'm sure that many people will go through. It's filled with aha experiences, which is the sign of a truly transformative book. So, Greg, over to you, please.
Well, a lot of works which form the foundation for new paradigms come about as a result of a personal tragedy. And if we're going to go into the foundation of how this book came to be, I think my case is particularly relevant. I'm an herbalist. My wife and I had 3 manufacturing plants in Lake Charles, Louisiana, one of which was an herbal company. And I was arrested in September of 2004. And that would, in September of 2003, and that would begin a process over 8 years where I just saw all manner of criminal activity on the part of the people who were supposedly paid to enforce it. And my case was just this one very long concatenation of instances of cognitive dissonance, because nothing in my case made any sense to me, because so much of it defied the common narrative. While I was imprisoned a second time, because they always go back for seconds, in 2010, I happened to read a copy of Marshall Sahlins' book, Stone Age Economics. And in Stone Age Economics, what Professor Sahlins does is he basically takes small indigenous societies and he separates the relationships to them. Maybe I should actually show the graph so that people can understand that all true life emanates from pure love. The relationship, for instance, that everyone can relate to, the relationship that a mother has with her child. The mother has nothing but love for the child, is not expecting anything in return, didn't have that child to have is a source of exploitation. And what Sahlins did is he basically takes that as a, maybe we can show this. I don't know if it'll actually show up or not. This particular graph is kind of important. It's the linchpin, if you will. And as you leave this relationship of pure love, because the relation of a mother having a child is kind of the microcosm of our relationship to the Creator. We are created out of pure love. It says in the Vedas that the purpose of creation is the expansion of happiness. And out of that, then you get the linear sector, the village sector, the tribal sector, the relationships within the village. The more distance we have between people, the less we get away from that source of life from which there is pure love. And what I found very interesting about his work is he always talks about various degrees of reciprocity. It seemed to me he was almost fearful of stepping outside that boundary, as if we all know that professors are not allowed to think outside the box because they're paid to be supporters of thinking within the box. So I found it extremely interesting that this area had not been explored by anybody. And I thought to myself, what were to happen if we were to actually talk about the various layers that exist within our world of what Marshall Sahlins called negative reciprocity? I shorten it and I call it negaprocity. I had to create a new word to try to truncate it. And what I came up with is just this massive kind of intellectual epiphany that just changed my world. And this all happened while I was in prison, by the way. I thought, oh my God, this is really an unbelievable way of thinking of your world. Now, we know that nobody needs to be trained or get an education. We talked about this previously. No one has to be told if they buy a new home where they put the refrigerator. They know it goes in the kitchen. They don't have to be told where to put the beds. They know they go in the bedrooms. They don't need to be told where to put the dining room table. They know it goes in the dining room. But yet people have all these artificial constructs that exist in their world. The existence of financial systems, the existence of governments, the existence of non-governmental organizations, and they don't do anything they have no understanding of where to place them in their world, because the planet we live on, you could think of as as your macro house. So out of that came to me the realization that when you actually put all these things in their proper place, and it's much simpler than it sounds. I mean, I think fundamentally the book is immensely simple. I think you could, if you had the patience, you could explain this to an 8-year-old. I don't think you have to have, 150 IQ to understand these things. What came out of that to me was just an incredible epiphany. And when I juxtaposed that epiphany over the state of the world and the fact that we are significantly seeing habitat collapse all over the planet. I wrote a book in 1986 called Lumen Food for New Age, and I talked about how even back then, I mean, this is over 30 years ago, we were seeing these dead zones form in the Gulf Coast, areas of sea that were 50 miles wide by 150 miles long, and basically everything in it is dead because of all the agricultural runoff that goes down the Mississippi. Well, it's far worse today than it was then, and to me, it was so amazing to me, so amazing that I had to actually think about what had happened to me, and it took 7 years from the summer of 2010 when I first had the idea for this book until the middle of 2017 for me to finally set it to script. But the response I've got from people are that they feel that many people are indicating to me that they feel they have this epiphany as well. And it really is very timely considering what our current state of the world is. Anyways, that's the short version. It gets into many more deeper subjects than that, but that's a kind of a broad overview.
Right. Now you start with the great winding, and you talk about government's evil genes, an obviousness we can no longer ignore, and you go from sort of the background of understanding BCN. Is that benign common narrative?
The benign common narrative. Actually, common narrative is used frequently, and a term is used frequently by anthropologists and people who are in the social sciences. There's nothing new about that. But what traditional academians don't get into is the character of the common narrative and how it's, they talk about the common narrative, but they don't talk about its inner character. It's designed to be benign. You are actually taught from the time you're a child all of these various things concerning the relationship between people and the benevolent government, and there's all these different layers that go into to how our thinking process is constructed in early childhood. And when you actually go the other way and you deconstruct it, you see that it's incredibly mellifluous, and it's designed to hide the parasitic nature of government and the institutions that are around it, which I organize in considerable detail. One of the points, I know I've offended certain people when I said this. One of the things, in fact, I got people writing me saying, they were amazed they never thought of it that way. I compare the media. We've heard a lot of these terms now, fake news, all of this brouhaha going on with Trump has kind of made it kind of a universal meme right now. But the point I make in the book, I actually lead with the same methodical step-by-step process that a high school student would prove a geometric theorem using Euclidean geometry, using Euclidean theorems to actually prove their point. I actually go through the same process to show that you should never complain about the press lying to you. It's their job. The purpose of the press is not to inform you. It's to test your stupidity and measure your gullibility. If they're not lying to you, if they're not giving you a crock of bull, then they're not doing their job. That's what they're supposed to do. And again, these are all these kind of counterintuitive elements that are just weaved throughout the book that make people, that because it's in defiance of the common narrative, but it's the only thing that makes sense. And I haven't had anybody come to me and say, I read your book and that there's any element of it that it makes sense. A person doesn't have to agree with everything in my book, but they're not going to find anything in the fabric of the book and how it's structured where they're going to be able to find it. They're going to be able to say it's illogical.
Yeah. Could you kind of walk us through what government's evil genes are? Because what you're saying is, as an exopolitician, I can see that your basic thesis is historically correct, because the institution of government, like the institution of religion and the institution of money, all three of those, government, religion, and money, were imposed upon us by a manipulatory external off-planet force, namely the Anunnaki reptilians. And you are making here a sustained rational argument that government is a pathological institution. And could you walk us through, for example, in the Great Winding, just walk us through some of government's evil genes, understanding negaprocity, the nature of governments as creatures of extreme negaprocity, so that people can begin to understand at the detail micro level. You can even read from the book if you wish. I think it's a tour de force. I think it's a series of the most powerful arguments that I've heard of why governments need to be abolished. They are institutions that were brought here from other constellations like Orion for the purpose of colonizing Earth and as a slave population. Over to you.
Boy, where do I start? Well, the ideas you expound are kind of almost in themselves corollaries of, Francis Crick's idea of panspermia. The co-discoverer of DNA came to the conclusion late in life, there's no way that this Earth, that life developed here. It came from other places. And one of the many things that has been bequeathed to us, in this case by mellifluous outside source, is government. And you don't have to take this as a matter of faith. Let's say that you're standing on a street corner, and I may be able to tell that you're there because I see your shadow. I may be able to tell from your shadow, are you carrying an umbrella or not? Are you walking your dog? Do you have a coat on, or are you thinly dressed? There's all these things I can tell from your shadow. Intellectually, you can look at the nature of government and tell from its shadow and work backwards, almost holographically, to determine that it is an exterior force that's designed to control people. And to get deeper into your original question, how we do that is the structure I've created, this idea of sectoral distance, our relationship to government. You can't compare, let us say, the relationship that nation states have with their citizens with, let us say, Marshall Sahlins' example of the relationship that chiefs have with small populations that live in the jungle, for instance. And I've spent a lot of time in the Amazon jungle. I can tell you that you do have tiny little kind of hierarchical structures. There's nothing like here, because when you're dealing in close contact with people, it's very difficult for someone to lie to you when they're your neighbor and you deal with them regularly and you have to see them all the time. These close connections bring people into a more normal state of human life, the way that it used to be before the creation of these institutions. But the farther you get away in relationships, the farther, let's face it, the average politician on this world, he couldn't name 1% of the people that are in his jurisdiction. He's so far removed from them that what that creates is a form of objectification. Cattle are people. What do you do with cattle? Well, you milk them to death and then you send them to the cattle house. You send them to the slaughterhouse. So by understanding relationships that exist between people within society and the organizations that are created, we can get a sense. We can create a kind of create a linear structure. This is on page 44 of the book. I call this Caton's negaprocity chart. We can actually define the various institutions and what our relationship is to them in a very structured way. And when you get to government, there are institutions that are more evil and corrupt and even more parasitic than government, and there are those that are less so. But we're able to actually put it all together into a structure that makes sense, where people are actually going, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? The other thing I want to point out about this is I think a lot of people are able to sense the things I talk about in my book intuitively, but they are constantly bombarded with information from the media, and they want to feel like they're a part of the whole of society, so therefore they don't want to feel like they're oddballs, which is part of the control mechanism anyways. And I use the metaphor in my book about professional wrestling. Now, everybody knows what professional wrestling is. And everybody knows that in professional wrestling, the people inside the ring, they're not athletes, they're actors. It's scripted. The outcome of the professional wrestling match has already been predetermined. But you get people who will go to these events, and some of these venues are very large. And there can be nobody in that auditorium that doesn't know this whole thing is fake. It's all predetermined. The people in the ring are just actors. The outcome's already be determined, but they will root for their favorite wrestler. They will pretend. They have to suspend the intellect and suspend their reality so that they can enjoy the show and pretend as if this is a real match. This is a real wrestling match. It's fair, it's objective, and the athlete who's the better wrestler will win, none of which is true. And what I indicate in my book, people do the same thing when it comes to politics and their relationship with their governments. They suspend everything that they can see around them. They suspend the facts that are clear and enter into a state of mind where they pretend that, for instance, let's use United States politics as an example, that there's really any difference between Republicans and Democrats, that they're not basically both controlled by the same group of people, that they're that when they do a climate conference, that they really take, that they really take the betterment of the ecology seriously. All those, they suspend their observation of the obvious to enter into a frame of mind where they agree with their oppressors. They enter into a state of mind where we have a version of the Stockholm syndrome where they agree to participate with the jailers in this grand experiment that actually is nothing more than created for their own enslavement. So I hope that answers your question.
Right. Yeah. Now, you also write, testing the limits of gullibility, how government conspiracies are used to test and measure, quote, victim resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah. What exactly is that? Could you talk about that?
Well, a government doesn't know the limits of what it can get away with until it, by the very fact that people accept money that's worthless as a source of value, and that they're willing to accept, that people wittingly or unwittingly are accepting the benign common narrative and accepting the existence of government. Government needs to know and constantly test what can we get away with without doing damage to the benign common narrative that we have so craftily and carefully created over centuries. To do that, they've got to put out these things where they're testing you. Example that I use in the book that was highly contentious was one example was this whole birther movement involving Obama. Barack Obama puts out a birth certificate that is delayered. Perhaps people who have to know Photoshop to understand this. He literally put out a birth certificate that was so obviously fraudulent. It was as if he was testing the public to see, I know you're stupid, but I want to know how stupid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put out a birth certificate that's so fake that anyone who knows the basic fundamentals of Photoshop can deconstruct it and see that this thing was layered and thrown together. It's completely artificial. And the usefulness of that cannot be understated, because by knowing how gullible or stupid the voting populace is, then you're able to know what you can get away with. Let's say, by way of example, let's say that the government had not done previous tests with countless false flag operations to know that if a president, in this case JFK, came out and announced, well, we're just going to start printing our own money in accordance with the original Constitution, goodbye Federal Reserve Bank, had they not done previous tests to know what they could get away with, they might not have done that, but they know they could get away with it. They know they could come out with this Warren Commission and come out with the goofiest theories imaginable, and people were going to go, okay, all right, whatever you say. They knew they could get away with it. So this is actually a mechanism that's used by government to know the limits of what you can get away with without disrupting people's confidence in the benign common narrative, which is critical. Because without a benign common narrative, government doesn't have legitimacy. And as Joseph Tainter, the picture he paints very clearly in his book, the Collapse of Complex Societies, it's always critical for a government to maintain legitimacy. It maintains its legitimacy by getting you to accept the narrative that it creates. It gets its legitimacy from getting you to suspend all notion of any belief in what you see, hear, and smell and taste, and believe with all your heart that, going back to my earlier metaphor, that the people in the ring are athletes and not actors, and that the match is unscripted and it's a fair fight.
Right. Now, you also talk about psychopathy and sectoral difference, how your model, which you showed us a schematic of, provides an understanding of the relationship between good and evil, and some historical documents that enhance this understanding. Could you walk us through that a bit?
Well, in getting into this whole area of negaprocity, negaprocity, of course, goes outside the boundaries of, let's get to some fundamental terms that your listeners may or may not be familiar with. We know what reciprocity is. All good relationships are based on reciprocity. I'm doing something to help you, you're doing something to help me. And there's this mutual enjoyment of us mutually helping each other. All human relationships are based on this. Outside this area of sectoral distance, we get into a realm that is called what I call negaprocity, a shortened version of negative reciprocity. In other words, we get into the realm where the nature of human relationships becomes increasingly psychopathic. I have a relationship with you. You don't matter to me. You exist in this world for me to figure out a way to take advantage of you. I'll transact with you, but I want the upper hand. I want a situation where I'm consistently the winner. You are consistently the loser. And I get into fine gradations of this because I want people to have a really, really clear understanding of this. It takes government, which of course is responsible for more mass murders and torture and the most unbelievable atrocities imaginable over the last thousands of years, to understand why government could never be anything other than this. And the other reason I thought the book was important is because there's a large group of people who actually think that this is an anomaly of government. It's not. When governments declare war, when nations declare war on other nations, and young men go to war, and thousands are killed or maimed, enormous human misery is created. These acts are not anomalous in the course of government. This is its nature. An analogy I use in the book is a mass murder. Okay, every Halloween I go out and I rape and murder 3 women. And the other 364 days of the year, I'm a little angel. I go to work, I pay my taxes, I take care of my neighbor's dog. Only one day a year do I go out and rape and murder women. And so therefore you should think I'm a basically good person because it's anomalous. I only kill people. I only commit murder once a year. You shouldn't think of me as a bad person because the other 364 out of 365 days, I'm basically a good person. It doesn't matter. What defines my nature is the fact that I occasionally do these horrifically evil, unbelievably evil things, and occasionally throw the dog a bone so that people think, well, my nature is basically be good and beneficial and beneficent, and when something evil happens, it's anomalous. And when you understand my concept as I lay it out of sectoral distance, you realize that government is fundamentally evil. There's a point that I make in the book, and I think this is important because I'm trying to see if I can find it here, where it's a kind of the linchpin of the book where I start to really get into the meat of it. I go, whereas Jefferson would tell you that government is a necessary evil, which that rubs me the wrong way right there. Whereas Jefferson would tell you that government is a necessary evil, I would remove the euphemistic framework from this portrait of modern government and dare to speak more plainly. Government is necessarily evil. And as it relates to improving the lives of ordinary people, it is neither necessary nor reformable. And when a government fails to manifest its evil genes, it risks falling prey to one that does. Criminal conspiracies and a general environment of deep-seated corruption are not anomalous in the course of modern government. They comprise the rule, the sine qua non, the coin of the realm. Not content to demonstrate the simple principle that might is right, modern governments has devolved to the point where supremacy, if not modest success, is predicated on being more evil than thou. And it's a structural thing. I opened the book with an analogy of a spoon. Everybody knows what a spoon is. You know, everybody knows what a spoon is. I haven't met anyone who doesn't know what a spoon is. And so I open with the simplest analogy I could possibly think of to approach people who have no background whatsoever in political science or any of these other disciplines, you know, just the average person. And of course, at the top of the page, you've got a picture of a spoon. This is how I start the book. And I say, this is a spoon. There are many things you can do with a spoon. You can use it to dig holes. You can bang it against other spoons or objects to create what you think is music. You can use it to help fill the radiator of your car with water when you can't find a water hose or a pitcher or a carton or a funnel or a small glass. You can use it to annoy your cat. There are 1,000 uses you can find for a spoon, yet there's only one function for which it's best suited and for which people use it more than 99% of the time: to eat food or take medicine. In other words, you use it to ingest things through your mouth, particularly small quantities of liquid food or soft food. The reason that this is a spoon's best function is because that is the purpose for which it was created. Any other function is artificial and not in keeping with the spoon's original design or its essential nature. This is government. There are many things you can do with government. You can use it to rally people to a cause. You can use it to tell people how much you care about social justice, civil rights, law and order, the environment, world peace, racism, or democracy. There are 1,000 uses you can find for government, yet there's only one function for which it is best suited and for which its designers use it 99% of the time: to mask, nurture, cultivate, and actuate criminal conspiracies. In other words, you use it to create the appearance of goodness when in fact it acts as a cover for the most evil and hideous human activities imaginable. The reason that this is a government's best function is because this is the purpose for which it was created. Any other function is artificial and not in keeping with government's original design or its essential nature. And then I close with: the book you're about to read deals with the true nature of things, not contrived appearances. Provides an easy to understand model, which we've talked about, that transcends in simplicity, power, and irrefutability anything you have ever seen or been taught, to explain how your world really works. It is the most honest and timely book you may ever read. It ends with a view to escaping the planetary destruction that runaway government must inevitably bring, a process that is now well underway. We close with something that is as positive and uplifting as the negativity that is giving it birth. I hope you find it as enlightening and life-changing to read as I did writing it. And from there, from that seed, using Wittenberg's Logicus Tratitatus, we go into this model that in my mind, and I've had 7 years to think about it, is so hermetically sealed intellectually that I think if the governments of the world put together the top 10,000 PhDs in the world and they've tried to refute the fundamentals of this book, good luck. And I know that, I know people are going to think that's arrogant or presumptuous or whatever, but I challenge anybody to take this book apart and find a flaw in it.
Well, I was duly impressed by many, many aspects of the book. And for me, one of the most impressive parts of the book was because it grew out of the fact that that this book deconstructs and makes a direct analysis in its argument of a document that in my world is called the Protocols of the Sanhedrin. And historically, it's known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And we covered this in a webinar in December of 2017, at the time of the Tsar and the Bolsheviks having possession of the protocols carried a death sentence in Russia. So if it was a fabrication, you know, it was a pretty diabolical fabrication. But the webinar that we published in December was entitled that there's evidence to show that the Sanhedrin, which is the secret Zionist government that goes back to Babylon and to Samaria, executed Jesus of Nazareth, or that figure, as an extraterrestrial disclosure activist. That's the reason why he was executed. And this comes out of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this is revisionist history, but it does establish the existence of the Sanhedrin. It does establish the reason for their executing him, and it's based on historical documents in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, the protocols weren't listed in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the protocols were available in Tsarist Russia, and if you were in possession of a copy of the protocols of the Sanhedrin in Tsarist Russia, it carried a death penalty. And you're right, the protocol stripped bare of all mention of ethnicity. So let's not provide as clear a picture as I can find as to what extreme negaprocity in action affects in terms of thinking, policy, and goal. My impartial analysis proceeds from that standpoint. Let me just, let's see, page 86, I just got it. Oops. Sorry,
Did you want me to?
Yeah, to
comment on.
Yeah,
okay, well, look.
Pick up the ball and.
Let's assume for a moment. Let's assume for a moment.
With the protocol.
You and I were talking. Let's assume for a moment that you and I are talking right now, and I were to say to you, Alfred, there's World War III is going to start. It's going to start in July 2023, and it's going to last for 18 3/4 months. Oh, and by the way, World War IV will start in 2025. It's going to start in June of 20. It's going to. Okay, let's say I made this whole series of statements to you, and this was transcribed and maybe even found its way into print. And we could fast forward 100 years from now, and all these details of what I said to you turned out to be spot on. Question: would the statements that I originally made to you now, would they be particularly significant if what I say is going to happen over the next 100 years actually happen? I would say that what I had to say was significant because I made statements that were highly prophetic, probably because I was a part of a group of people who were going to create these things by design. Similarly, we have this document, and I just hate when people get in the, things get written off because, they offend somebody, or it's racist, or it's this and that. In this case, I quote right in the book, it's right there in Wikipedia, which is surgically attached to the powers that be, saying you should ignore this, ignore the man behind the curtain, this is anti-Semitic, or whatever it would be. I'm not going to put up with this nonsense. As I said earlier, I've been surrounded by Jews my whole life, and it's
yeah. I mean, let's just agree to agree. Look, I'm a member of the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal. Our tribunal found that the state of Israel in 1947-48 committed genocide against the people of Palestine by the steps that it took in annihilating and displacing 1.5 million Palestinians who are Semites. They are the Semites. The Israelis are Khazars. They're from Eastern Europe. And the Eastern European Khazars stole an identity out of the Bible and said, there was a King David, and I'm a Khazar, but I'm going in and I'm going to say that King David and the Jewish people were Khazars. And so we can come and steal the Semites' land. We can steal the Semites' land where the Palestinians land, and we can commit atrocities here. We can push out 1.5 million Palestinians who are Semites. Those are the Semites. And, so they use the big lie technique. They make it that anybody who says that that was not a war crime is anti-Semitic. Now, I want to make it clear that I was a judge, a member of the tribunal that found that the state of Israel committed genocide and war crimes in its war against the Semitic Palestinian people in 1947-48 in establishing the state of Israel using the methods that it did, which included paper money bribes in paper bags left aboard Harry S. Truman's campaign train in the 1948 presidential election. And bribes are in the protocols of the Sanhedrin.
Well, they're very prominent in there. I mean, it's not.
Yeah. So both the Jesuits and the Sanhedrin were born in the temples of Babylon, which are satanic cults. So, so the protocols of the Sanhedrin are the protocols of a satanic cult. And a satanic cult used bribes and so-called prophecies to erect a state in 1948, which is a rogue war crime state. But let's get to the protocols that you set forth in your book. I'm looking at the book now, and this is in chapter 5, the protocols. Protocol number 1, and I'm quoting, the best results in governing them, government again, are attained by violence and terrorization and not academic discussions. Might is right. So, isn't that the basic rule of government, that government makes violence okay? Government.
Well, I mean, this is the point.
Is that a human institution that legitimizes violence? Isn't that?
Well, it does. This is not a new observation. I mean, Max Weber, one of the leading founders of modern sociology, made that very clear and wrote about that in the late 1800s. I mean, it's very clear that the things that we all agree are horribly, horribly evil and wrong are routinely committed by government, for which they create the most unbelievable justifications for what they do. This is kind of on par with, Joseph Stalin's comment, if I kill one person, okay, I commit murder. But if I kill 10 million, it's okay, it's a political act. This kind of insouciance that the most unimaginably evil things are okay as long as the government does it. It speaks once again to the genes that underlie government's DNA. Now, what you were saying about Israel, I don't dispute any of that. You know, I kind of had an eye opener when I read, you know, Chris Hedges' book from 2002, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. Okay, and he goes into the most unbelievable stuff that he observed, you know, going down in Israel. I don't doubt any of that, but what I tried to do is, rather than get into any kind of, I didn't want this to turn intellectually into kind of a bra rabbit and the tar baby. I didn't want to get someone to be able to get hung on something over something as petty as an ethnic issue. I wanted this document, which I think it's very important that people read it. I mean, Henry Ford thought it was important. Henry Ford spent millions of dollars trying to get Americans to read this stupid document, okay? And put out a publication out of Dearborn, Michigan, and did all these things because he thought it was vitally important to know what lay ahead if more people weren't conscious of it. But even Henry Ford didn't have, this is my personal opinion, the presence of mind to know, how do we examine this, and can it be done in a way that's shorn of getting caught in ethnic issues? What I do in this book is I say, let's tear it apart. And I don't even open the chapter with that. I open the chapter with Machiavelli's The Prince, okay? I don't think Machiavelli's The Prince is an anti-Semitic document. I don't think even Wikipedia would say that it is either. I want to study the very nature of reciprocity and how when you let certain groups of people run the world who are ostensibly psychopathic, what you get is planetary destruction. And I don't even think the average person understands the trouble we're in. I really don't. I don't think people understand habitat collapse. I don't think people understand the relationship between habitat collapse and the complete annihilation of all advanced life forms on this planet. And this is the direction in which we're headed. And I think I can't think of a subject we could be talking about that's more important than that one, or more germane to what's happening in the world.
I'm going to keep pushing the envelope, because I don't think that, quote, anti-Semitic, I mean, I think that we have to toss that out. That's part of...
Of course we do. I mean, David Icke has spent countless time, you know, it's Ashkenazi. You know, I get this friend of mine. I'm not going to say his name because he's a well-known author. And this friend of mine who, you know, it's become like this ongoing joke. He'll send me this thing of something going on in the world, and then he'll source and then in the subject line, and I ask him to stop doing this, but he won't stop. He'll put in the subject line, "It's the Jews, it's the Jews, it's the Jews." You know, I don't know. I think we reach less people if we don't create structures that take our intellectual opponents and cut them off at the knees. And that's what I do. Anyone who's going to try to give me that, anyone who's going to throw me that crap and tell me that over some ethnic issue, that this book doesn't show the path of destruction that we're on, and I don't want to give my intellectual enemies, as it were, ammunition.
Yeah,
I don't feel.
I understand now, but let me go to this. This is very important. There are 3 institutions which systematically are burning down our planet: government, finance and money, religion. They're burning down our planet, and they're being used to cause World War III. You can trace back to Albert Pike and the Masons.
I quote on that in the book. I absolutely agree.
Yeah. And it seems to me that what we have here are secret societies that have criminal conspiracies to control those 3 institutions, to control government, to control money, and to control religions for their ends, all of which are destructive, ecocidally, and destructive genocidally. Mm-hmm. And what you're doing here is that you're surfacing the conspiracies. There's nothing anti-ethnic about it. You're surfacing the conspiracies. And one of the conspiracies, you know, the evidence for one of the conspiracies is the plan of the Sanhedrin. In the same way, if you go back to the World Zionist Congress in the late 1800s, where they adopted the 6-point star, that star is a symbol of a diabolical entity. That star is a symbol of a diabolical entity. So that you have the secret societies that are adopting these protocols that go back thousands of years to Babylon, that go back to Sumeria, all of which were diabolical societies, because they were based on manipulatory reptilian extraterrestrials,
Right.
like the Anunnaki ETs. And then they surface in the 1800s with the plan to make the 20th century, you know, a harvest century. They do it every 1,000 years. They kind of harvest humanity, and that's what's happening now. And so we're just bringing to the surface. Of course, there's a secret society, and look, this is what they believe in, the protocols. They use this 6-pointed star, which is a diabolical entity, you know, of a devil that eats children and does all kind of stuff. And so, however, what you're showing how the institution of government, the only functions, the core functions of government are genocidal and ecocidal. And that's why government as an institution was imported to this planet by a colonizing extraterrestrial race. And so it's time to throw off that particular institution in the same way that it was time to throw off, it's time to throw off money, credit, and banking as an Orion import, and it's time to throw off religion as another Orion import, that there's a caste of priests between us and the creator.
I think a major point of my book is that even if you didn't have the archaeological or documentary evidence to prove the things you've said, to use my earlier metaphor, I can tell by your shadow that you're holding an umbrella. And I know that you're out with your dog for a walk. I see the shadow. I can't see you. I can't see your dog. I can't see your umbrella. But I can see the shadow. And working this backwards, yes, an attorney friend of mine who used to work for The Hague, maybe you know Jerry Bruce Wilowitz, I don't know. Anyways, one of his pet sayings is, yes, the world is being held hostage by a Babylonian death cult. And it is. It's a death cult. It's a death cult. It actually, somehow, the people who are in charge think that, another metaphor I use is, we're all on an airplane. There's almost 8 billion of us. We're all Homo sapiens. We're on an airplane. And a handful of people are in the pilot's cabin, and they're kamikaze pilots. And they're going to take all the rest of us. They're going to crash the plane, killing themselves and all aboard. And they have somehow been convinced by their demonic handlers that somehow they're going to come out of this unscathed. It's the most unbelievably psychotic, you know, it's the far reaches of where this leads to. Because contained within the genes of government, through whether you study, if you're a student of history, whether you study someone as prolific as Oswald Spengler or Will and Ariel Durant, or whoever you have, or Toynbee, Arnold Toynbee, whoever you study, whether you think there's 25 or some say 25 or 26 iterations of what we call civilization, each one, though, was taking us in the same direction because it takes time. You know, it wasn't as if they created government and overnight the world becomes a sterile planet. It takes time for these things to work. But my point in my book is that contained within the genes of government as a concept and as an operating entity, contained within those genes are planetary destruction. Let's say that you and I right now, you and I are malevolent ETs, and we have just found this planet. We're Campaneros, we're malevolent ETs, and we've decided we're going to take over that planet. We're going to depose the apex predator in charge, and we're going to take over. We're going to kill every carbon-based life forms on that planet. We're going to re-terraform it and use it for another purpose. The first thing you and I would have to do is invent government and money and religion and methods of controlling and oppressing, basically all the things that they talk about in the protocols. That would be the first order of business. So to get people who are governed by these entities to believe that somehow they're benevolent or that, I don't know, my book's a deprogramming tool. If you read this, and I've had people actually tell me this, you read this book, my goal is to make it so that you're not the same person as before you started reading the book. And to do that, you have to create a structure that transcends any notion of ideology or philosophy or ethnicity or any of the other tools that can be used to undermine your polemic. And that's what I did. And that's the crux of it.
Right. Now, in the second, moving toward kind of the great unwinding, you call it, part 2 of the book, you move toward a vision of unconditional love is the foundation of creation. Negaprocity is the destroyer of worlds. And why extreme negaprocity left unchecked leads to the death of our planet and the implications of our Holocene Extinction Event. What is our Holocene Extinction Event? What is the Holocene and what is our Holocene Extinction Event? Just spell it out.
What people would say modern times, whether we argue, it's since 10,000 BC or 12,000 BC. I think Louise, the book that I quote within the book says, is pinpointed the flood that's in everything from the Bible to Gilgamesh to countless to 35 other indigenous societies that talk about the flood happened somewhere that they've been able to pinpoint to 9,750 BC. Who cares? Who cares? What we have now in our modern time, this is what the Holocene Extinction Event is. We have not just affecting one species, but across the board, we're losing something on the order of. There's no way that I think we can accurately quantify this, but it's been estimated somewhere around 200 species a day. We're losing 200 species a day. I moved to Louisiana in 1984, and I moved to Bayou Country. And when I was there, you saw all manner of frog and toad and snake, and the land was verdant. The bayou was verdant. And between 1984, just in a span of 23 years, between 1984 and the time that I moved out of there in 2007, you could see a collapse of biomass. And we're seeing this all over the world right now. As a result of Fukushima, we talked earlier about Lorraine Murray and her incredible work. I mean, the Pacific Ocean is done. Stick a fork in it. One event. And if we had anything like the EMP that the powers that be are just drooling over having, we'd have like 300 to 400 more. I mean, we've got one Fukushima, and we've had one Chernobyl in '86, and then Fukushima in 2011. Can you imagine having 200 more? I mean, Fukushima by itself, look what the damage has done to the Pacific. It's as if you see this direction that's being taken And there certainly seems to be enormous purposefulness and purpose and intentionality to it in the direction of killing off everything on this planet and using it for another purpose. I can't see any other logical explanation. I don't think it's dumb luck, and I don't think it's just by happenstance. I think there's an intentionality to this. But when you understand my concept of sectoral distance, you understand government's place in the world, and you understand the relationship of the institutions that are above and below government in the whole negaprocity chart, you understand that the course that we're on couldn't be any other way unless there was some kind of outside intervention, which is what chapters 8 and 9 of the book attempt to do. Because I not only live in Ecuador, but I've spent a lot of time in the Amazon. I've taken like over 300 different ayahuasca journeys, and there's shamans who are ayahuasqueros will tell you, you don't choose ayahuasca. Ayahuasca chooses you. If you were to ask my wife, for instance, who I've taken 20 journeys with, what she got out of it, she will tell you, my wife will tell you, I saw bright lights and snakes and spiders, and I didn't find anything really truly meaningful in it. In my case, I actually, I see into other realms, and I see the interconnection of things, and the physical and the astral and the noetic. I'm actually able to see how these things interact. I wrote about this in a book in 2012 called The Gospel of 2012 According to Ayahuasca. And all of my experiences as a psychonaut, all of my experiences using entheogens have all revealed to me that the essential foundation of everything creation is universal love. Everything. And all of the good things that can come into the universe are harmonics of universal love. And the farther we get away from that, the farther we get away from that impulse that is the foundation of creation, the more we enter into the realm of annihilation. Intellectual, emotional, spiritual, psychological, whatever other adverbs you want to throw in. And so it's important, it's really important to understand the relationship between all these institutions and how they fit in terms of the layout of creation. And when you do that, you realize that these institutions that so many people think are just, pardon my French, just so damn bitchin', because they get a Social Security check or a Medicare check or this or that, they don't understand. A guy that goes out and murders 3 people once a year is still not a good person. Hard argument to make, I know, but that's the argument I make. And that's what government is. It does things occasionally to support the benign common narrative, but at its core, it's here to destroy us and every living thing on this planet. I mean, every single carbon-based life form on this planet. And it's when it does so, it's not aberrant. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. I think it's important for people to know that.
Right, because its ultimate expression are the deep underground military bases where its survival of government function is, and that's its ultimate expression.
Well, I wrote about that last month. I think this is kind of, boy, is this really germane to your point? There's this guy that, I guess it was on Leak Project, this guy named Icke that says that, well, you may have heard already from Dane Wigington, we've kind of gone from UVA to UVB to UVC. We're kind of, from the sun, we're kind of moving to the point where what we really get from the sun is microwaves. We're all going to get microwaves. Isn't that lovely? Something's happening, and it ties into this whole geoengineering area. And this guy came out and said, I've been measuring the direction of this thing, and I have done some linear regressions. I've done some calculations using linear regressions. At the rate that we're going, in the next 7 to 8 years, you won't be able to grow something outside. My jaw dropped when I heard that. And I'm going to tell you why. Yeah, I'm sure that you knew who the late Jim Marrs was. He wrote a lot of best-selling books. But like a lot of authors, a lot of these guys write best-selling books, but some of their best works are the ones that don't sell. the ones you ought to read are the ones that nobody else read. In 1999, Jim Marrs came out with a book called PSI Spies, and on page 176 of that book, he gets into this whole thing about the remote viewers seeing that what they saw in the remote viewing sessions was complete destruction of life on Earth by a complete collapse of the ozone layer. And that led me to write about something that was pretty important. I was corresponding with this physician in the Netherlands, a man by the name of Dr. Hans Muhlenberg, who wrote a book I really loved a lot. The title of Dr. Muhlenberg's book was If by Chance, A Study in Synchronicity. And he talks in this book about something nonfiction he's working on, where the elite are planning to destroy all life on the planet, build underground bases, destroy everything on the planet by letting the ozone layer collapse so that basically everyone's burned to a crisp. They're living fine underneath the base. Insane, psychopathic, but I kind of found it interesting that the in synchronicity and this Icke coming out with his stuff, and then Jim Marrs' comment in his book PSI Spies, and then Dr. Muhlenberg's comments from the book that he wrote also in the early 2000s. If it's not happening, it's exactly the kind of thing that they would do, you should expect from them to do. It fits right in with their MO. So I just thought it was interesting. I wrote an essay about it last month. But, you know, to me, it doesn't matter. You've got all these arguments floating out there where they built the underground bases, and Planet X is coming back with the Anunnaki, and so they need to be in the, or is it the ozone layer, or is it because of impending nuclear war, which I think is unlikely because they control all parties. It doesn't matter. It's the direction of things is just more and more and more evil. We just can't get enough of psychopathy. We just can't get enough of testing the far limits of evil. We can't get beyond seeing how far we can go from the light and life still actually exists. It's nuts. It's insane. But it's entirely contrary to natural law, and it's contrary to this fundamental force that guides the universe. I mean, if you have the experiences that I do in ayahuasca, you see electrons and protons swirling around neutrons, and you understand that on some unfathomably profound level, even love is behind physics and causes the electrons and protons to spin. And this kind of cosmic experience is the basis of a famous poem by Walt Whitman. You know, I am he who aches with the amorous love. Does the earth not gravitate? Does not all matter aching attract all matter? So the body of me to all I know or meet. This is a cosmic experience of the fundamental nature of life. And what government is part of a movement. Government, finance, all the things that you talk about. Government, finance, religion, the press, all these entities are part of an experience to say, we're going to give the creator the bird. And we're going to see how far that gets us. We're going to defy natural law to the nth degree. And we're going to see what it means to be the ultimate cosmic contrarians. And this is where we're at. We're at a juncture. We're at a juncture between complete annihilation and a rebirth. And the last part of my books attempt to make the argument that I'm voting for a rebirth.
You talk about visions of resurrection in the universal mean, notes on a coming, quote, event. Could you kind of roll that out for us?
Well, as a person who's in the natural healing field, one of the many modalities we work with is kinesiology. And kinesiology, the foundation of kinesiology is this fundamental idea that we were all connected to universal truth. We are all connected to the ether from whence real truth can be obtained. And if this is true, and if you believe this, if you believe that there is this, there's the universal unconscious that can be tapped by people who have certain abilities, there is an uncanny correlation by a lot of people who see in a coming event something that where there's a complete change of direction. I had a journey with some friends in San Pedro in October of 2016. My friends thought I was crazy. I had this ayahuasca journey. I told them that, I don't know how, I said, Donald Trump's going to be president. There's going to kind of a change of direction. There's going to be the aversion of, there's going to be several nuclear false flag attacks that are aborted. I made all these statements, much of which has already been shown to be true. But one of the things that I saw was that within parallel universes, they're run like train tracks, and that we were running on a train track, and somehow someone had pulled a lever, and we were going to take a more positive. We were now on a more positive track than we were otherwise. I know a lot of people don't believe in parallel universes. They're real. I talk in my book Gospel 2012 about an experience I had where I was completely freaked out because I was in deep meditations, and I was meeting a Greg Caton, someone even with my name, on a parallel universe. And his life was exactly the same as mine on that parallel universe up to the age of 18, and we split. And I was having conversations with this other part of myself on a parallel universe, completely freaked out. Well, my mother, I talk about this, my mother was was like this Hungarian gypsy who had profound psychic abilities, always freaking out neighbors, always freaking people out because she would say things would come true. And it disturbed people. I mean, she's, later in life when she became ill, she kind of lost her abilities, which is common for people that are gifted. When they get old and infirm, they start to lose their abilities. So I go to my mother and I said, have you ever heard of such a thing? I mean, do you believe in parallel universes? We've never really talked about it. And my mother said, well, yes, even though you don't have your name or even your own gender on other parallel universes, I have counted 135 Greg Catons. I was blown away by that, even coming from my own mother. So I said, 135 Greg Catons. So I just, being impish, I suppose, I felt an impulse to make light of it. And I said, well, quantum physicists say there must be billions of parallel universes. How could there only be 135 Greg Catons? My mother, who was very innocent, didn't realize I was just joking. I was just making light. And she turned to me with the saddest look I've ever seen. And she goes, I'm so sorry, dear. I got tired of counting. These things do exist. And I believe that World War III has already happened. There's other parallel universes. There are other Earths like ours, and they're completely dead. They're sterile. They're antiseptic. And there's other Earths that are behind us in timelines that as you yourself have noted in the span of your work, we don't live in a universe. We live in a multiverse. And included within that multiverse are countless timelines. And I believe, and again, I make this point in my book, I believe that this is from the view of a very conscious creator who's allowed this to happen for a purpose, allowed all this evil and all this proliferation of government, which is just completely, we've just soiled our bird nest with poop, that somehow this all serves a divine purpose. And what that purpose leads to in our parallel world line is something that is spiritually magnificent. And we should grab hold of that possibility because our co-creation of it, our belief in something better than what we're living with, feeds it and helps create it. We are called upon, I believe, to actually work with the Creator to bring about this magnificent revelation where evil was used to show the contrast between good and evil, to able to show the span of what is possible within the realm of living as a spiritual being within a human body. and that we should grab hold and take advantage of that opportunity. That's the point I make in the closing of the book.
Right. So do you have specific steps, or is this a book that is intended to bring awareness and elevation to the discourse and to the individual?
Well, I mean, I think it goes without saying, I would never even for a moment claim, monopoly on creativity. I want other people to take this as take where I leave off, and it's kind of like I'm making a statement about where we are, and I'm opening the floor saying, now I want your ideas. I want you to contribute to something where, instead of me acting like I'm some kind of guru telling you here's how we do it, let's open the floor, let us all participate and open the floor to the ideas of how we co-create this. Because I don't think it's going to come from one sector. I think it's going to have to arise, it's going to have to come from a rising consciousness. And the other reason I hesitated to go in that direction is because, I think we've had enough, religion and gurus and everybody else dictating to others what they should do, when what people really ought to be doing is finding within themselves their connection to the Creator. I make that point strongly in Gospel of 2012. People need to find their own connection. It's funny, I have a funny anecdote about that. I went to Maharishi International University in the late 70s, right? I was a meditator. So I'm in a business relationship with a man by the name of Teju Srivastav. He had a company in the early days of the internet called IFU.net. I'm sitting in his apartment, and I told him I'd go to this university, and I said, do you have any opinion about the science of creative intelligence or the work of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi? And right out of his mouth, Teju says, "Oh, he's a fraud." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Why do you have that opinion?" He says, "Oh, he's my cousin. I know all about the man. Don't even tell me anything about him." I said, "Your cousin, the Maharishi? Don't call him Maharishi. His last name is Srivastav. If you look on his Indian passport, he has the same surname that I do. I don't understand you Americans. Why you have to give your money to every Muni, Rishi that gets off the boat?" It was so we have to find the Creator within ourselves. The religion is fed by this idea that you need to have someone impose morals and ethics and everything on you, when, as Lao Tse makes clear in the Tao Te Ching, when you get rid of the rules and you get rid of, you get rid of all the superimposed value system that the controllers want you to internalize, then you have real growth as a human being. And so I didn't win this book. I didn't want to go too far in the direction of, okay, now I'm going to say how it's going to be done. I think there's a lot of people out there who quite possibly could do a whole lot better job of that than I could. What I have done, my contribution to this, is take us to the point where the structures that surround us can be properly placed so that we get an idea of where we are, how we got here, and what the immense possibilities are for us going forward if we are simply able to throw off the chains,
So what are your plans to get this message out? I mean, do you write every day? Do you run a newspaper? What do you do as a communicator?
Well, it's very early. I mean, I technically, I'd finished in September, but it took until just last month to clean it up and, get rid of all the typos and, so really, I think 4 different people proofed it. Yeah, I'm sure you've been through this, which is, it seems like, there's extensive review process. But to answer your question, I mean, between friends and associates and people that I know in the alternative media, I've been doing my best to try to get the word out to people that I know. Just now putting out a press release, and you do something like this, you don't know what support you'll get from unseen quarters. I don't claim to be a professional book marketer. It's not my forte. So, you know, it is challenging for me because it's not my, it's not what I'm talented at. I had an associate who became, and boy, we were completely opposite people. I had a business associate in the mid 80s who became one of the biggest names in the history of TV infomercials, Kevin Trudeau. He's certainly sitting in federal prison in Mississippi for contempt of court charges. I am just not that kind of a, you know, promoter, or, you know, but in my own subtle way, I'm just getting this out to key people that I know, to try to give it a certain critical analysis and to get people to respond. And that's really the best I can do under my circumstances.
Yeah. Well, you know, I truly believe that this book can come out of our community and it can come into the mainstream. I really believe that this book is accessible to the mainstream. So have you thought about bringing it into the political mainstream, say from a libertarian kind of point of view?
Well, you know, as I told you, I was interviewed by Jeff Berwick last month, whose whole thing is anarchy. I'm kind of in the process right now of seeking these people out. Again, it's very early. I just finished this last month. So it's very early in the offing. So I'm also looking to join partnerships. I certainly didn't make this book. I know people have this idea that whenever you produce a book, you're just doing it to make money. I'm a practicing herbalist. This is not the kind of book that you come out with if your goal is to make money, because this is the kind of book that actually draws the ire of people you don't want to draw the ire of. But I think we're at such a critical juncture to not speak our minds, and to have this kind of epiphany and not share it, I think would really be wrong. Again, I hesitated. It's not like, you know, I rushed this to press. This whole thing unfolded in my mind in the summer of 2010. And I waited 7 years until I really felt it just seems like now is the time, because we are at the precipice.
Well, I mean, this is such a substantive book, and it does come out of the mainstream. And as someone who grew up on Bayou La Fourche, I must tell you that we all know about the prophecy that Lafayette will give rise to a transformational movement. Have you heard about that?
Vaguely.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had not. I have a colleague who is from Lafayette, who has become very involved in world affairs, and his particular thing is to protection of the Philippine people, who are scattered all over the world. They've been kind of scattered as indentured people and servants to the world. Okay, you have Filipinos who are all over the world as nurses, as house cleaners, you know, in the Middle East, in the US, in South America, in Asia, in Europe, kind of Filipino people. And yet the Philippines are one of the richest nations on the planet because of all the gold there that is stored by the tribal leaders. There's billions of dollars, trillions of dollars of gold that is stored in the Philippines, that if there's ever a planetary revaluation and redistribution of the money, which there's all kinds of rumors that this is, you know, how every person on the planet can be a billionaire, you know, if things happen that, and there's all kinds of rumors in that way. In fact, just as you called in a person who is directly connected to the plans for the revaluation in the US, called me. That's the kind of synchronicities that are going on. And so this person who is, his family is a longtime prominent Lafayette family. And one of my childhood friends, I grew up in Assumption Parish in Louisiana for part of my life, in Napoleonville on Bayou Lafourche. And it was back in the idyllic days in the 1950s. Fats Domino came to our high school prom, you know, that kind of view of things. And
I'm sorry, where did this happen?
this happened in Napoleonville, Louisiana. You mentioned Bayou country that you moved.
I lived in Calcasieu Parish. And
Yeah.
so as small as the state of Louisiana is, I must confess, I don't know.
Oh,
Even
well,
in southern Louisiana.
I grew up partially in the heart of Cajun country, down in Lake Verret, Pierre Par, Napoleonville, all of these kind of deep Cajun country, Bayou country. And so reading your book reminds me of a prophecy that one of my colleagues from Lafayette said, that a tremendous transformation is going to come out of Lafayette, because to the extent that you were in Lafayette when your journey began,
yes,
and your book is one of the deepest transformational books that I've seen at the planetary level, it's kind of fulfillment of his prophecy. That's a compliment that I'm communicating.
Wow, that's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, because I was thinking that, because I was wondering, you know, you're down there in Cuenca, and I have had many colleagues, you know, several important colleagues who have been in Cuenca in various stages of their lives over the last decades or so. And I myself have worked with them while they were in the Cuenca area. And I just wondered if you would start giving online lectures or courses on your perspective. I mean, you don't travel. Do you travel to the States anymore, or do you stay outside of the States?
I haven't been back to the States since I came here in September 2011.
Yeah.
I prefer this kind of discourse online because it's easy for me, and I'm trying to think of how to say. I'm usually at a loss for words. You know, there's a part of me that can't even think of being on U.S. soil without having post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, if you knew what they did to my family, threatening to throw my wife in prison for nothing, saying if you'll agree with what you'll sign the plea agreement we come up with, or you know, I had to hide my son. I had a 7-year-old, so I had to take my son and hide him so that federal agent, because I was told by various reliable parties, you know, they can just take your son, put him into social services, say you're an unfit parent.
Yeah.
Well, look what they did. Look what they did to Loren Murray. Look, these are depths that cannot be plumbed. I mean, the evil, how evil these people are. And so to answer your original question, I have no reason to believe there's like a pending indictment or anything else. I don't expect to end up on the Interpol red list again with Osama bin Laden. He's dead, but nonetheless, it's a matter of, for me, it's a matter of comfort, but I make myself available. Anybody wants to talk to me, if someone wants to put together something and have me as a participant, as a speaker, I don't close myself off to talking to anybody. It hasn't reached a point yet where letters I get from readers, it's the email is not so great that I cannot give a thoughtful response to each reader who comments and sends me something. I mean, that may not all be the case at some point, but at least for now, I'm able to continue to respond to everybody, whoever they are. And so but if I had my druthers, honestly, I'd rather not travel. I mean, when you've actually gone through an extraordinary rendition, when you have been kidnapped by agents and stuck in a plane and go through all the crazy things that I talk about in Metatopia. I mean, when you've actually been through that, it's
yeah. Could you tell us a bit
terrific.
about your other book? It's called Metatopia.
Well, it's an online book. I'm currently tying it into a larger work. It's 450 pages. It'll be out within the next 60 days, called Living on the Precipice. And the subtitle of the book is Global Corruption, the Supremacy of Fake, and Reflections on Near-Term Extinction. The Essential Internet Essays, 1996 to 2008. Anyways, I'm incorporating Metatopia in there. The book's online. It's got typos, needs to be cleaned up. It was kind of after I got out of prison briefly in the summer of 2004, it was something that I wrote to try to make sense of. It's a very, very heavy thing when the world's most powerful government comes after you with claws fully extended and makes you like you're the world's worst person. I mean, I ended up in newspapers with Osama bin Laden. Imagine that. This is the February 8th, 2008. I was on the front page. I got calls from friends and family, completely freaked out. The title on the front of the Parade magazine said, "Who are the world's most wanted? Who are the world's most wanted?" And number one on the list was me.
Yeah, and you were there because you had published leading genuine cancer cures, correct?
Well, we can postulate. I think there was a number of confounding factors. One of the things was Trudeau was telling federal authorities I had millions of dollars in my offshore bank accounts, which I found curious because at that time I didn't have an offshore bank account. I think if you're going to commit tax evasion with your offshore bank accounts, the presumption is made you probably need to have an offshore bank account. I didn't have one. I mean, crazy. FDA officials saying they were going to put me away for 20 years just based on the tax evasion charges alone on, again, offshore bank accounts that didn't exist. There's nothing about my case that didn't just smell of, huh?
So you were framed.
Well, I mean, you have a very rich background in this area, far more extensive than my own. I mean, you might have insights that even to this day that I don't have, but I know there were confounding factors. I know that I was given not one, not two, but 3 lie detector tests by an agent of the FDA. I mean, why is this their business? 3 separate lie detector tests trying to find out where all these non-existent assets were. And this all comes out of this Department of Justice, the creation of this thing called the Office of Asset Forfeiture. They create federal crimes if you have assets they want. They'll create the crimes to fit what they want to confiscate. It's insane. And Paul Craig Roberts kind of intimates this in his book, The Tyranny of Good Intentions, which he published in 1999. Everything in that book is absolutely true. It's out of control. It's nuts. I mean, my experience with federal agents was like something out of Alice in Wonderland. I mean, what I experienced was just so over the top on every conceivable level that part of what produced this book, maybe this is like in a cosmic maybe this was the case of sand getting kicked into the oyster's mouth so as to produce a pearl. Because I would never have had these realizations, I don't think. I would never have come to the conclusions that I've come to, and I would never have produced this book had I not been run through the federal meat grinder so mercilessly, had You know, I mean, 15 years later, I still haven't financially, here it is 15 years later since my arrest, and I still haven't financially recovered. I mean, it's been a journey. It's been a Swedenborgian trip to hell and back again. So, you know, out of that came these realizations as to the, you know, it causes you to do some very, very deep thinking. And it's out of that this work is, was the result of what came out of the oyster.
Right, right. Yeah, so you have another book coming out in
Probably at the end of February, the Living on the Precipice, and it's a reworking of putting together in a very coherent, logical way these essays that I've put out over the last 22 years. I've been on the internet since 1995. I was developing web pages in 1995, back in the day when all we had was HTML 1.0 without Netscape extensions, and you couldn't even put an image next to text. There wasn't an align equals left or an align equals right tag.
yeah.
So you know,
Yeah.
I've been on, and I was doing hypertext work before there was ever an internet. There was a company out there called Intergate. I was designing things in Intergate, which was a precursor to what we now call the World Wide Web. So, you know, I have a very rich background in
Yeah.
these things and produced these series of books. John Kaminsky's a friend of a friend. He came out with a book, I don't know, 12 years ago, called America's Autopsy Report, the Internet Essays of John Kaminsky. And that was kind of the inspiration for this. But for years, I've had people asking me, you know, to clean up Metatopia and make it into a book. So now I'm incorporating it into something larger, and it'll be about 450 pages, and it'll be out at the end of February.
Well,
But
we look forward to that, and we would like to invite you back so that you can share that book, share the contents of that book and your experiences there, and your wide insights, which you share at the beginning of this book, with us. So please keep us in mind, and you know, send us an announcement with the publication of that book, so that we
that's very thoughtful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So your chapter 9 here is preparation for the trip, our journey home. Could you tell us where home is and what is our journey?
Well, I draw from my earlier work with the Gospel of 2012 according to ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm.
I have actually had experiences, and I talk about both that in this book and the previous one. I have actually visited another world. Maybe it's a parallel universe, I don't know, but it clearly is living optimally as a human being, living, as I say, well, I'll just quote one very small part to try to give a taste to the reader to the listener of what I'm talking about. I had this, life as you know it was meant to be lived. Life as you know you were meant to live it. And I've had these experiences, as have others who are psychonauts, very close correlations here of another world where there are none of these malevolent entities. There is no Babylonian death cult running the show. There's just human beings interacting with each other in a state of just pure giving and pure love and experiencing optimal human life. And I have to believe that this is coming from somewhere. It's not something that I created. It's something that I experienced. And I was given direct cognition in my book, The Gospel of 2012, that how this develops, where we go from here, is based on a partnership between us and the Creator and our collective consciousness. That through our collective consciousness and how we act with the Creator, we are called upon to produce this better world. I don't think people appreciate the role of free will in all this. We're all kind of stuck in this thing where, and this is also part of the control grid, to believe in determinism. You can't do anything, accept your fate. It's not going to get any better for you. Okay. No, there is free will, and I don't think we realize the full range of our powers and abilities to create something better. And I mean, I'm making it excessively simplistic for the purposes of our dialogue, but that's you know what it's like. It's like we have a love affair with the Creator, and the relationship is like the relationship for a man who's pining away for the love of his life. You can't make the girl love you. She has to choose to love you. You can't make the girl love you, because then it's not free will. It's not choice. We are called upon to make a choice, to embellish that love affair, and to the degree that we understand it and accept it and are able to perceive it and work with it, we are able to develop, in my mind, collectively a better world. This is why another reason I would never want this to go into a place where I become a central figure of some sort. I want to be working with groups of people, and collectively, our collective effort takes us to a better place. And I think this is what we're called upon to do. I can't accept a scenario where, okay, here's the converse for a moment. Things are bad. They're only going to get worse. We're headed for mass extinction. We're going to create a sterile planet. The end. Somehow that doesn't seem too particularly satisfying. I know that you don't think that's particularly satisfying either. I know that your listeners are not going to find that satisfying either. So if that's not satisfying to us, how do we make something better? And that's what chapter 9 of the book is about. That we have to believe that there is, that in a universe that was created by thought, right? The Word was made flesh, okay? In the universe created by thought, that we in turn have the ability to generate thought. And thoughts are things. And thoughts together with people who are united in a common purpose can create something better than, if we can quote Trump, a shithole. We can actually do that. All right.
Good. So, so you're active. You're looking forward to the publication of the next book. This is actually, I think, a very hopeful book, because you are naming the disease, you're naming the perpetrator in a way that the public understands. The perpetrator is something very familiar. It's the elephant in the room. It's government, right? And
it's something more fundamentally, this is like the medical process. Yeah. You can't cure a problem unless you first get an accurate diagnosis. And yeah. I suppose that my book comes out in the spirit of, wait a minute. We don't have a good diagnosis, or we don't have a diagnosis that is comprehensive. And if we want the best cure, we have to have a better diagnosis. And so that's what this book does. I mean, at the end, I'll agree, the second part of the book is significantly smaller than part one. I admit it, but I think it's important, before we venture into talking about our therapeutic options, we have to have a good diagnosis. And that diagnosis cannot include a worldview where these incredibly mellifluous entities can be viewed as reformable, because they're not. Because what they are is contained within their genes. Yeah. And they have to be confronted for what they are. And I think this book, I know I'm being presumptuous when they say this. Everyone will say, yeah, you're the author. I think this book does, in a more clear and precise and structured way, does a better job of defining the diagnosis to the global problem than anything I've read. I mean, if someone can create, maybe I just haven't come across something that covers this territory adequately, but I'm a voracious reader. I mean, I'm sitting next to a library of 6,000 books.
Wow.
I probably have the largest library of English books written in English anywhere in Ecuador. So if it's out there, I'm not familiar with it. Even ponerology came close. It doesn't cut to the core. I believe that I've got something, a message that provides the basis with, or at least has the potential for us to work together to alter course. And as I quote numerous times in my work, I've quoted it in the 2012 book, I quote it in this book, I talk about the Icke. And the Icke was so profound to Confucius at the age of 70, he said, I only wish I could live 50 more years to uncover all the hidden truth within the Icke. But the whole 64 hexagrams, the entirety of the Icke is based on an immensely simple principle that when things reach their far extreme, they revert to their opposite. And when you're talking about global extinction, I don't think in the direction of evil. I don't think the pendulum can swing too much farther in that direction. So we have to sense that there's this opportunity to ride the pendulum back into balance and to a life of happiness where we can live on a planet of, whether it's this planet or a new Earth, we can live on a planet of happy people who delight in making each other happy, who delight in this endless ebb and flow of love, which is at the very foundation of creation going down to the subatomic. And in that, we experience our true nature, something we're not able to do now because, to me, in my mind, it's painful living on this planet. It is. When I think of just how screwed up it is, it's painful. It's hard, if you're a normal human being, it's hard for you to enjoy yourself when you know your neighbor is suffering and crying. And if you have any sense of empathy or compassion, or in a healthy planet, everybody's welfare becomes the concern of everyone else. And if you don't have that, well, you pretty much have what you have now, which is a complete, complete negaprocity run amok. Negaprocity is truly the destroyer of worlds, and that's what we have. And we diminish ourselves if we don't think that there's something better, and we don't communicate and work with each other to try to create something better. We are then beings diminished as a result.
So how can people who want to contact you and learn more of your work and be in touch with you, how can they do so?
Well, they can write to me at Greg, G-R-E-G, that's my first name, Greg at gregcaton.com. gregcaton.com is my bio page. But they can write to me, Greg at gregcaton.com, and I will respond to them.
Mm-hmm. Are there any specific points or any issues that you had wanted to bring up today that we haven't had an opportunity to touch on yet? Well,
the book is very dense. I like I say, I'm a voracious reader. I've read thousands of books in the course of my 62 years. And I read a lot of books where I say to myself, and maybe some of your viewers I just finished 500 pages. This could have been condensed to 80 pages and I still get the point. This is not one of those books. This book is, and agreeing or disagreeing, you're welcome to, because you've read it, unlike your viewers. But I have something, there's an epiphany on every page. If someone is really looking at it, because everything on it is consequential. This book is not packed with any fluff. Everything in it, I did that deliberately. Everything, yes, the book is whatever, 380 pages, but it's dense. And you have to really take your time to go through it, because what I'm trying to impart is an experience. I just don't want people to kind of like scan the book. I want people to have the experience, because there's so many ahas that you can get from this book. I think I wrote the book, and for me it was transformative. Something I wasn't expecting when I first conceived of it 7 years ago. It has somehow fundamentally changed even me, because as I was writing it, so many pieces of the puzzle came glued out of the ether, to the point where at the end my wife said, I don't think you wrote this. I think this was channeled. My own wife of 25 years thought, well, I have several other people who have told me, this seems on a level that's even above you. So, maybe from all the maybe from all the psychonauting, maybe in part this was a channeled work, in the sense that,
the other way you could look at it is that this is a book from your higher self.
Oh, I'm sure that it was. And I've had just this cavalcade of epiphanies have come out of it that give me a clear vision of what we have to do to work together to avert the course we're on.
Yeah, I think it's a transformational, it's an expansion, it leads a way forward, and we did a webinar a few months ago with an artificial intelligence from the year 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And that artificial intelligence said that the next era on the planet is the post-national era. And it's the post-government era. It's the end of all these, borders and...
Yeah, well, in my mind, that's a natural conclusion. You can't, this kind of goes back to Einstein's comment, insanity is thinking you're going to do the same thing over and over again and get a different result. Yeah. We know collectively, where we now know where government takes us. And where it takes us is in fact planetary destruction. And so that, to me, what you just said is only logical. I mean, we just can't. This isn't going to cut it anymore. This is just not going to cut it unless in some kind of, this is not in any way likely, but in a collective insanity, we just think it's a really great thing to completely make the planet sterile and lifeless.
No, but what I'm saying is that in the light of that prophecy that was given during that webinar about 2 months ago, your book is like a building block that comes in and says, here's the first building stone of that new world. So I'm saying that, whoa, it's amazing to watch these building stones of the new world come in, of the new earth. So in that sense, I want to thank you. We all want to thank you for that. And I want to commend everyone who sees this to really speak to it, to their neighbors, to their friends, to their networks, to begin reading and talking about your book. And I want to really say, you say the joys of psychopathocracy. Now, that's sort of a very ironic title, isn't it? Aren't you using joy?
Well, think about it for a minute. If the point of the book is to enunciate this long chain of instances of cognitive dissonance that we are bombarded with all the time, it seemed to me fitting, perhaps, to contain within the title itself a very deep irony. Yes, it's intended. The joys of psychopathocracy. Somebody's having fun doing this. People who are extremely psychopathic. Oh yeah, they're having fun doing this. They enjoy this. But what are the consequences of the joys of psychopathocracy? And that's the direction I take the book. So yeah, it's ironic. It's, perhaps even slightly cheeky, but I felt it was needed to maybe draw attention to something that doesn't get enough attention.
Very good. Well, thank you so much again for all the time, the insight. We can't give you back the lost time that you've had in the experiences that you went through in unlawful imprisonment and in state terror. However, many of us have gone through similar circumstances at the hands of governments who believe that they have the right to do that, even though it's unlawful and a violation of war crimes and the Geneva Conventions, because we have governments that are at war with their own people. Therefore, I think it's war crimes. Anyway, thank you so much. Are there any final words that you'd like to leave our audience with for 2018? Until we meet again, that is.
No, the other aspects of my work with people on the cutting edge of alternative cancer, those are entirely other areas. But as it relates to this book, I hope people read it. I hope people, if they have questions, write to me, because I'm able to discuss very deep and arcane aspects of this book that other people would not be able to, not be able to properly respond to. So I think it's a profound experience, and I hope people enjoy it and really learn something, at least get half out of it what I got out of it.
Well, thank you very much again. Okay, good luck.
Thank you. I want to talk to you about off the record if I